Ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me? I think you can, that's marvellous. Good morning. Welcome to this Green Alliance event supported by the CBI, entitled Beyond Paris. And beyond because although all eyes are on this major moment that's due to happen at the end of the year and on what will be achieved there, it's the political commitment that follows that really matters. What will any deal lead to? Will it build momentum towards limiting global warming to below that crucial 2 degrees? And will it put us in practical terms on the road to really developing a global low-carbon economy? The speakers you're going to hear today will, of course, be talking about what they hope will be agreed in Paris, but also about the long term, the route to stabilising global temperature rises, the route to helping poorer countries bring about change, and also, of course, about what this means for the UK business community. We'll be getting an international perspective, and we're delighted, of course, to have as our guest speaker the former American Vice President Al Gore. We'll also be looking at the UK and asking whether the cancellation of a series of domestic low-carbon policies by the government since the general election means that the commitment to a greener economy is slipping. But to start the day, it gives me great pleasure now to invite our first speaker to the stage, the US Ambassador to the UK, Matthew W. Barson.
Thank you, Reeta, and a huge thank you to our friends at CBI and Green Alliance for pulling this all together and pulling us all together. It is a great honor for me to introduce your keynote speaker. I had a chance to tell Vice President Gore before we came on that we are about to move our embassy from Grosvenor Square across the river to Wandsworth. And I told him that his influence can literally be seen as you watch this big, wonderful new building come up, because it has ground source heat pumps, intelligent lighting throughout, and solar panels. And we are aiming for platinum efficiency. And even while we take that giant step, we're also taking little ones too. And I had a chance to confess that every once in a while at Winfield House, I bump into one of these. A good old-fashioned incandescent light bulb, which we know are energy hogs, and I replace it with one of these, the compact fluorescents. And these light bulbs made me think of Al Gore also. It has taken a long time to convince people why we must retire these old incandescent light bulbs. The light's wonderful, they're quite familiar. They're kind of the iconic symbol of innovation itself. But it's been a long, hard sell. Do you know when Al Gore held America's first congressional hearing on climate change? 1976. I was focused on other things. The problem with these old bulbs, as you know, is that 95% of the energy they consume goes to heat and not light. And I'm sure our keynote speaker could provide an assessment of the heat-light ratios in the climate discussions and debate over the last 40 years. As I travel around the UK and listen to and learn from 18-year-olds, we talk about climate, and I ask them the question that I know you all know the answer to, and I say, who invented the incandescent light bulb? Sometimes, maybe because I'm American, they say Thomas Edison, which you all know is not true. The incandescent light bulb was invented by, yes, a British inventor named Joseph Swan from Sunderland. He just didn't get his patent in quite as quickly as Edison, but he was the first to illuminate a building with electric light. Swan and Edison fought each other for a few years across the Atlantic. Not the first time that has happened. But then they came together, they joined forces and founded a company called Edison and lit up all our homes. And that is how, Al Gore tells us, we need to innovate away from our carbon-based economy and toward a new, exciting one. He's a hugely influential investor now in this area, and one reason why the New York Times recently called him, quote, a prophet of possibility. Now, this process isn't easy, it never has been. When Edison was asked about his failures, Imagine the countless number of broken light bulbs in his lab. He famously said, "I have not failed, not once. I found 10,000 ways that won't work." What's exciting now, of course, is the pace of change lets us make these things much quicker. Back home, President Obama from day one has acted domestically. He's increased fuel economy standards, done lots around energy efficiency to cut consumption, and over this time, we have cut our total carbon pollution more than any other nation on Earth. And we will continue to work globally. You saw what the US and China announced earlier, to build momentum as we work multilaterally with partners like the UK to make sure that in Paris we achieve an ambitious, durable, and effective deal. And of course, the theme of today, that we keep innovating and improving beyond Paris. But we could never be here where we are in this debate, bringing this great group together in this room, if it weren't for Al Gore's extraordinary advocacy. He keeps finding ways to make it work. Ladies and gentlemen, the advocate who woke up the world to the climate crisis, the clean energy visionary who is helping lead us through it, Emmy, Grammy, Oscar winner, Nobel Peace Prize winner, Al Gore.
Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. What an over-the-top introduction and a history lesson that some of us needed along with it. Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you for representing our country so well in the United Kingdom. I hear such positive comments and reviews, and I really am a very big fan. And we're neighbors, Tennessee and Kentucky. I want to thank the CBI and the Green Alliance and all of those who worked so hard to make this event happen today. I want to thank Matthew Spencer, the director of the Green Alliance, and John Cridland, Director General of the CBI. Also Loretta Minghella, Chief Executive of Christian Aid, and the others who are listed as the principals here. And may I also acknowledge my colleagues who came this morning from Generation Investment Management. Our offices are not far away. Colin LeDuc, one of our founding partners, Simon Clark, and Sedef Koktan-Turk, and I think Hans Min is around here somewhere as well. Thank you for acknowledging how long this has been. I was reminded of how long I've been working on this issue not long ago when I was with one of my partners in a restaurant, and a woman came walking by the front of the table and just stared at me as she passed. And I thought nothing of it until a bit later when the same woman came from the opposite direction, just staring at me as she walked past. And so I looked up and I said, how do you do? And she said, you know, if you dyed your hair black, you would look just like Al Gore. And I said, thank you. And she said, you sound like him too. But I have had the great honor of working with the Green Alliance in the past. And I wish to compliment the Green Alliance and the CBI for taking such a leadership role in trying to bring people together across partisan divides and elevate the significance of this climate crisis that is now threatening the future of human civilization. There is, however, along with the threat it poses, a fantastic set of opportunities. So it's not at all an accident that leaders in the business community are focused on the opportunities and indeed unleashing the creative energy of investors, inventors, entrepreneurs, and corporations that have the ability to take these new technologies that have such amazing promise and make them a reality bring them to scale, sharply reduce carbon emissions, and actually open the door to a bright future in which the flourishing of humankind can once again resume. There really are only three questions regarding the climate crisis. The first one is, must we change? We've had a good run these last 150 years or so since the breakout of the Industrial Revolution really began to mature into a burgeoning civilization, and it has lowered poverty rates and lifted standards of living. And yes, it's a mixed story, but overall, we have enjoyed many blessings. And since most of the raw power that fueled this rise of human civilization came from carbon-based energy, it's natural to ask, must we change? It looks like it might involve some effort to change. 85% of all our energy still on a global basis comes from carbon fuels. So do we really have to change? Well, the scientists have long told us that yes, the answer is incredibly clear. More than 150 years ago, not in this city, not far from this building, the great scientist John Tyndall first outlined why this was going to lead to a day of reckoning. And then the international group of scientists that has done such amazing work has made it very clear, and every National and Royal Academy on the surface of the earth is unanimous in saying this is an urgent task. But leave all that aside. Now Mother Nature is telling us in unmistakably clear terms that we must change. Today, we will, around this world, put another 110 million tons of heat-trapping carbon pollution into the atmosphere, that thin shell of atmosphere that surrounds the planet, trapping much more of the heat energy that arrives from the sun and used to escape in just the right proportion to keep temperatures perfect for humanity and for the web of living species of which we're a part. And 110 million tons added every day has begun to mount up. And in a conservative estimate that's never been challenged at all, the scientists tell us that the cumulative amount of man-made global warming pollution that's in the atmosphere now traps enough extra heat energy every day to equal the heat energy that would be released by 400,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every 24 hours. Now, it's a large planet, but that's a lot of energy, and it is disrupting the water cycle, raising temperatures, of course. Some 6,000 people died this summer on the Indian subcontinent and India and Pakistan just from the higher temperatures alone. And the threat to crop yields from the higher temperatures alone is now rising to the top of concerns around the world. The movement of tropical diseases into temperate latitudes, the melting of the ice and the sea level rise that follows. But as I mentioned, it's also disrupting the water cycle. 90% of this extra heat goes into the oceans, and the evaporation off of the oceans that leads to precipitation over land, which then rushes back to the sea, of course, as we all learned long ago. That process is being put on steroids, if you will accept the analogy. It's being supercharged. And so England had its wettest winter in recorded history. Thousands of homes were underwater in part of this land for weeks at a time. Just today, the historic downpours in Iran are in the news. Every day, the television news is like a nature hike through the book of Revelation. And sometimes the commentators connect the dots. Most often, they do not. Not to be critical there, but just to refer to the fact that what is going on a global basis is historic. These downpours are unprecedented. The melting of the ice is unprecedented. And the drying out of the land by the same heat energy has rendered California, the largest of the U.S. states, 99% of California is in drought today. And all around the world, you see historic levels of drought. We are disrupting the natural balance. And these events, for example, Super Typhoon Haiyan, Pope Francis is in the U.S. today. Last year he was in the Philippines in the aftermath of the strongest ocean-based storm in history. 4 million refugees, some of them still not back in their homes. In my country, New York City was hit by Superstorm Sandy. My hometown of Nashville, thousands of my neighbors lost their homes and businesses, had no insurance because it was a once-in-a-thousand-year event, the statisticians tell us, even as they quickly revise the statistics to put new ones in place, because now the world is different. And just a few weeks ago, we saw the report that if we continue on this course, then over time, the sea level rise is predicted to be so astonishingly high that humanity, as essentially a coastal species, would have to retreat from many of the great cities of the earth. And some of this begins to sound like a science fiction story. Unfortunately, it is true. Next, a week from today, I will be in Miami, Florida, where some of the streets flood just with high tides now. And their access to fresh water is threatened. And their sewage system is threatened, not to mention flood insurance. And cities around the world are already dealing with this. And yet there is this question, must we change? Yes, we must change. Now, the second question is, can we change? And here, the news is thrillingly optimistic, because the entrepreneurs, the scientists and engineers have succeeded in bringing down the cost of collecting electricity from sunlight to a level where it is now competitive in many regions of the world with electricity from burning these dirty fossil fuels. And just as with the famous Moore's Law that has brought these computer costs down so much and has led to these devices that most of us have, it is transforming the world. I'll give you a quick analogy. I remember when I was a young congressman, I was an early adopter of technologies. I got one of those first big clunky mobile telephones, and I thought it looked so cool. I couldn't wait to show my friends. And around that time, and around 1980, the largest telephone company in the U.S., AT&T, commissioned McKinsey to do a global survey. How many of these things could we possibly sell by the year 2000? And so they did the extensive work and reported back 900,000. And when the year 2000 came around, sure enough, they sold 900,000 in the first 3 days of that year. And now there are billions, 7.5 billion of these mobile phones. Another 1.2 billion will be sold this year. Why were they not only wrong, but badly wrong? Not even close. Well, I think there were several reasons. One is they did not fully take into account that the kind of change that we grow used to in our lives, slow and steady, tomorrow is unlikely to be very different from today, as today was not so different from yesterday. That kind of change is not the kind of change that comes with these technological revolutions. Because when the scientists and engineers find a way to use their ingenuity to unlock these fantastic possibilities, the cost comes down dramatically, even as the quality goes up dramatically. They didn't count on that when they projected only 900,000 phones would be sold in the year 2000. They didn't count on the fact that the majority of the people in the world lived in regions that did not have the old landline technology grid. And so they were eager to leapfrog that old technology and take advantage of the new one. They didn't count on the fact that here the choice was in the hands of individuals, not parastatals or government bureaucracies or large corporations in a monopoly utility type position. And so that revolution has taken off incredibly. Solar cells, photovoltaic solar cells, are exactly the same. The fastest deploying country in the world is Bangladesh. We're seeing now a meteoric rise in the spread of this energy. And by the way, there is a big difference when the cost goes below the cost of the incumbent. In the business world, turns out I've discovered that when a new technology challenges an old one, there seems to be a difference between it being more expensive than the incumbent technology and being cheaper than the incumbent technology. Not just a difference of a minor scale. It's like the difference between 0 degrees and 1 degree. That's more than 1 degree. It's the difference between ice and water. And in markets, the difference between more expensive than and cheaper than is the difference between markets that are frozen up with capital withheld from investment and markets where capital is liquid and there is a flood of new innovation and investment and a tidal wave of change. That is what is happening. We have the possibility. So the answer to that question is yes, we can change. These new sources of energy, you could say, are literally heaven sent. Enough energy arrives to the earth from the sun every hour to equal the full amount of energy used by the entire world economy for an entire year. And so as we learn to harvest a slightly larger fraction of that energy at a cost that is affordable and now not only competitive, but beating the incumbent sources, then the answer to the question is, can we change, is clearly yes. Now the final question. And really, it's the reason that I came here today. The third question, must we change? Yes. Can we change? Yes. The third question is, will we change? Paris, at the beginning of December, is the host of this global meeting, and the countries around the world that have been looked to for leadership are trying to corral the others, once again, to come to a successful global plan. This time it will succeed. The great American poet in the 20th century, Wallace Stevens, once wrote the line, "After the last no comes a yes, and on that yes, the future world depends." The abolition movement, which began here in the United Kingdom, faced a lot of no's before the last no was followed by a yes. Every great moral cause that this world has seen encountered no after no after no until the question was ultimately resolved into a binary choice between what is right and what is wrong. And once that resolution occurs, the outcome is foreordained. But will the United Kingdom change? Will the United Kingdom provide the leadership that its friends around the world have so long admired? There are very few of those great moral questions that we have encountered in the past, from abolition to women's suffrage to civil rights and to gay and lesbian rights. There are very few of these questions where the United Kingdom has not been heard loudly and clearly. This is such a question because it involves the survival of humankind. It involves the question that our children will ask us not too long from now. If they live in circumstances where these dire consequences are worse, as the scientists and Mother Nature are now telling us they will be, they would ask us, why didn't you act? But if we unleash the power of business and industry and science and technology and go with this wave of change that is heaven sent, where we do solve this problem, then they will ask, how did you find the moral courage to rise up and change? I try never to interfere in the politics of another nation, and I don't intend to start that today. Indeed, the last time I joined with the Green Alliance was to applaud the statement that this group elicited from all three of the major political parties during your last campaign season to stand in unity in favor of solving this question. But as a friend of the United Kingdom, I must tell you in all candor, I am puzzled. Because since that statement was made, and since the election was held, this country's commitment to zero carbon homes has been canceled. This country's commitment to zero carbon buildings has been canceled. The Green Deal has been canceled. The climate change levy exemption for zero carbon energy has been canceled. Solar support via the renewables obligation has been canceled. Onshore wind support via the renewable obligation has been canceled. The renewable obligation and contracts for difference, gone. Public ownership of the Green Investment Bank has been privatized, or the announcement has been made. The differential vehicle excise duty has been weakened. The prevention of fracking in carefully protected areas has been reversed. Feed-in tariffs reduced by 87%. I'm puzzled. I'm puzzled. I say this without any partisanship whatsoever. Truly, believe me, I have been partisan in my country. I have never dared to express a partisan view in this country. I have refrained, as I should. I'm not a citizen of your country, but too much is at stake. And I was personally invited by your prime minister before he was prime minister to come and meet all of the ministers of parliament in his party. And I heard pledges and commitments that really inspired me. And I was grateful and encouraged and hopeful. And I've heard some speeches since then that have reawakened a kindling of that same hope. I know that there will be a speech next week. Words. Words. What about actions? The actions that have been taken here in the last few months are puzzling to me. I'm a student of politics. I hear whispers from number 10 that remind me of palace intrigue of some sort. Who is the leader? Who makes these decisions? I'm comforted by mutual friends of your prime minister that he personally still believes very strongly in this, and that he somehow does not really have the ability to take control of these decisions. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. And he hasn't said that, of course. But what is the answer to the puzzle that I'm describing to you? There is a way to answer it. Between now and the Paris meeting, recognizing what the business community here is saying and what the Green Alliance is saying, those who really understand that we must change, we can change, will decide that we will change. I'll conclude with this comment. When the United Kingdom has offered leadership, the world has moved. The United States, which has also been through a similar period where there were reversals, now has very strong leadership from the White House. And the United States has engineered an agreement with China, where the two largest polluters in the world are moving in a very bold and impressive way. Will the United Kingdom do the right thing? The answer to that may well be in the hands of the men and women in this room. But when that question comes from the next generation, we want to be able to say that we did do the right thing. We can change. And if we decide that we have the political will, we will change. And always remember that political will is itself a renewable resource. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm standing over here because I'm not mic'd up with one of those fancy mics, but.
About 10 minutes worth of questions, I think. I must say, I think that was the most resounding non-interference in domestic policies that I've ever heard.
I see why you have your reputation as such a great commentator. Thank you.
Questions for Al Gore. I'll take them in threes, please. And if you'd say who you are and where you're from, that would be great. So a woman here first, gentleman there, and then a gentleman there. Yes, please. And keep the questions quite short, please.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Madeline Cuff from Business Green. You said that you spoke to David Cameron before the election and heard the right things. Do you feel betrayed by the actions of the UK government since then?
Okay. And then there was a gentleman just here, in this row here.
I thought that was a very inspiring speech, but it seemed to me that it exuded a degree of optimism about the future that isn't really reflected in what is happening. I just have a simple question to put in that case, the following. Unless we are able to show ways whereby the process of climate change, which is, for instance, melting the Arctic ice cap, a way of reversing it, things can only get worse. And therefore, I think we've got to face that reality that it is already out of control, not that we should retain and cross our fingers in the hope that it is under our control.
Okay, thank you. And there was one more question just over there in the corner.
Alex Ward.
We can hear you.
Okay. Alex Ward, Al Gore, you talked about a lot of things that can be done by government or companies or leads that have been taken by USA or China. But what about human desire? I see that most of the world actually wants the American dream, and the American dream isn't necessarily about saving ice caps, but it's about having all those things like cars and tablets and everything else. How do you change human desire to help those energy targets?
Thank you.
So three questions. First of all, do I feel betrayed? I will not use that word. I purposely use the word puzzled. And I don't intend it to be swimming in sarcasm. I use the word because I've learned in my life that many problems that one is tempted to reduce into a Manichaean framework of good versus evil sometimes are born of problems in communication and complications that one is not fully aware of. I would be tempted to use that word, but I don't want to personalize this. I have great respect for the Prime Minister, genuinely so. I like him as a person. And I have seen in my own country where people who are well-meaning can be persuaded to do things that are really not in their best interests or their country's best interest. I had a brilliant headmaster when I was a student who was famous for a single saying. He said over and over again in life, we are faced with the same question, the same choice between the hard right and the easy wrong. And I think that the wrong choice on support for renewable energy and conservation and sustainability appears easy when financial backers with a stake in seeing things stay as they are quite clever and immensely persistent in giving all the reasons why it should not change. And there is also a facet of human nature that Yeats famously described with his oft-quoted words, the best lack all conviction and the worst are full of passionate intensity. Sometimes in the climate debate, I'm reminded of the scene in a movie where a dysfunctional family with an alcoholic father at the head of the dinner table who would fly into a rage if the word alcohol was mentioned, led the rest of the family to try to keep the peace by never mentioning the elephant in the room. And there is a form of passionate intensity on the part of the worst, if you will, who would lead us backwards to an older policy that is now vested with implications that are dire for the future of human civilization. The second question is optimism justified? I am by nature an optimist, but I tell you that the optimism that I feel on this question is not an act of will in defiance of what a realistic reading of the facts might otherwise lead one to believe. But it is true that certain changes have now already taken place that cannot be reversed. That is true. 2 years ago, actually a year and a half ago, scientists delivered a verdict on the West Antarctic ice sheet that its melting and breakup is now irreversible. That was an emotional blow to many who have followed the science of this issue carefully. And there are other changes that will be difficult to deal with. We've caused changes that we must accept as not reversible. That's true. But where does that leave us? In a pit of despair that paralyzes us and prevents us from taking steps to ensure that other changes do not become irreversible? The other ice sheets, we are told by those same scientists who are candid and blunt in describing what has been done, now tell us that there is time, almost certainly, to prevent the breakup of these other ice sheets in turn. The great extinction now underway, the sixth great extinction, should not be just accepted as a given. We have faced dire threats in the past. It was the British Antarctic Survey in 1986 that discovered the hole in the stratospheric ozone layer. If we had not reacted, that would have been a deadly threat itself. That was the first crisis of the global atmosphere. Margaret Thatcher led the world in recognizing it. And enlisted her friend, President Ronald Reagan, in responding. And less than 2 years after the discovery, the Montreal Protocol was enacted. I came here in 1990 as a US Senator to a conference hosted by Prime Minister Thatcher in which those provisions of that treaty were strengthened. And the hole in the ozone layer is still there, but it's shrinking now. And our children and our children's children now have the hope of living in a day where they can look back on a success that we solved this. Now, the carbon pollution is much more ubiquitous and intertwined with the fabric of modern industry and business, of course. It's a much more difficult challenge, but we can do it. And just because we've suffered damage doesn't mean we have to throw up our hands and say, oh, all is not lost. We can succeed in preventing these catastrophic consequences that the scientists say are now looming as a possibility. So the final question was, what about human desire? I don't accept the fact, I do accept, first of all, I do accept the fact that those in developing and emerging economies have a right to desire the standards of living that they see in their films and television programs that are enjoyed by people in developed countries, of course. But you know what the Chinese people desire now? The ability to breathe. Life expectancy in northern China has gone down 5.5 years. You can't even walk outside without choking on many days. And that's one of the reasons why President Xi Jinping joined with President Barack Obama in this historic agreement to reverse course. That is why China is moving boldly with the kinds of support for renewables that have been canceled here in the United Kingdom. That is why China is moving forward on solar, wind, efficiency, batteries, electric vehicles, and electrified mass transit, with green buildings and green homes. Again, the things that have been canceled here. So desire can take, human desire is not just defined by the way it was expressed in the past. What people desire in this world today is clean air, clean water, clean land with healthy food and good jobs. And by the way, the United Kingdom is over-invested as a national economy, I would say, forgive me if I'm impolitic on this, in the fossil fuel economy because the Industrial Revolution began here. And when the leader of your central bank raises questions about the viability of the financial system if there are not steps taken to move away from this overinvestment in fossil fuels, I think he's expressing a desire for a healthy economy and to avoid the kind of crash that the subprime mortgages caused the credit crisis and the Great Recession. We have subprime carbon assets. And as a percentage of the economy, they're more here than anywhere else. So we desire a bright future, and I think it's a very human desire.
Thank you. Do you have time for another 3 questions?
Okay, very quickly. Do I?
That's lovely. Right now, there's a gentleman there, a woman there, and a gentleman here. And to everybody else, I'm really sorry. Okay, that row there, and then a woman just on the same row. Short questions, please.
Abid Kamali. I'd like to ask you a question about a UK proposal for a global Apollo project, which would pool R&D across countries to try and lower the costs significantly for disruptive technologies like battery and storage. Is that something that you're supporting?
Say the first part of it again.
There's a global Apollo project proposal
that's
come out of the UK. Is that something you're seeing being supported by other countries? Do you see that being a part of the Paris Agreement? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then a woman there in blue. Yes, please. And then lastly. Yes, go ahead. So, sorry, the woman there in blue.
Thank you so much for addressing us. Joan Wally, Chairman of the Aldersgate Group. You've talked a lot about leadership, about the UK leadership, and about the Prime Minister. I wonder if you could perhaps tell us a little bit about the leadership within the Treasury.
Okay, let me just hear.
Peter Unwin from the Whitehall and Industry Group. You applauded the lead shown by the United States and China in the new approach they've taken. Do you think that the present and future American presidents will be able to persuade their Congresses to turn words into action after Paris?
Let me take the last question first. There is some confusion about whether or not the Congress would have to ratify a commitment made by President Obama in Paris. Of course, that concern is understandable because of what happened after Kyoto. I was our lead negotiator in Kyoto, and then the Congress refused to go along with it. But this is a completely different situation because this Paris Agreement has been designed not as a treaty, but as an agreement that can be entered into by the executive branches of government. And in the U.S., it is done on the basis of authority already given by the Congress to the President. In 1970, a long time ago, we passed something called the Clean Air Act, in which the Congress delegated to the President not only the authority, but the duty of reducing harmful air pollutants. President Barack Obama designated global warming pollution, principally CO2, as a harmful air pollutant. And the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, with whose decisions I have not always agreed, took up this case and decided that the President was correct. He does have the authority. So there will not be a reversal of what President Obama agrees to in Paris. That's very good news, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to clear that up. Now, the first question on the Global Apollo project, that is one brand that I certainly endorse it. I called 25 years ago for a global Marshall Plan. There are many ways of saying the same thing, that the world as a whole should mobilize to take on this challenge and turn the threat into an opportunity. Yes, of course we should. Here's a question. If you take global GDP, what percentage of that do you think is presently invested in research and development into new sources of energy, renewable sources of energy, efficiency, and sustainability? What percentage would you imagine? Here's the answer. 0.002. Our survival is at risk. The conditions that have fostered the flourishing of humankind are in jeopardy, and we cannot do that. We need to phase out coal and replace it with renewable energy. We can do it. We have the means to do it, but we must mobilize to do it. In World War II, this island saved the world. In my country, when we belatedly answered the call and mobilized, President Roosevelt called the leaders of the automobile companies into the Oval Office and said, we're going to have to make, he gave a fantastic number, so many airplanes next year, and you're all going to pitch in on this. And one of them said, well, Mr. President, I'm sorry, but that would mean my company, we couldn't make cars. He said, oh, you don't understand, we're not going to be making any cars. We're going to win the war. And in this case, we don't have to stop making cars. We need to shift more rapidly over to electric cars, efficient cars. Efficiency gives us the opportunity to win this without making it a choice between the economy. When did the economy most flourish? Well, when the Great Depression came to an end, it was because of the mobilizing to defeat fascism. When the great post-World War II surge, the economic miracle took place, it was because the United Kingdom and the United States and the other allies said, we've had enough of world wars coming out of Europe. We need to create the international institutions, the United Nations and the IMF and the World Bank and NATO and the trade agreements, and we need to pursue a vision of how we can prosper in the future. And that vision unleashed the economic dynamism and energy that created the prosperity of the modern world. What if we had an inspiring, morally based vision to unleash that kind of energy now? Well, guess what? We have one. And by whatever name you use to label it, it is to save the future of humankind and put people to work. You know, these jobs of installing solar panels can't be outsourced, and robots don't know how to do them yet. And making buildings more efficient, and I could go right down the list. But why do they need subsidies? You know what the subsidies for fossil fuels are? 44 times larger than the meager subsidies for renewable energy. And all the infrastructure for fossil fuels is already built. The embedded subsidies are so vast. If we want to change, we can, but we must decide that we will. Now, the final question was about your Chancellor of the Exchequer. I don't really know him, and so I don't think it would be proper for me to comment. But I will return to a thought I expressed earlier. He's not your Prime Minister, right? I mean, I don't fully understand the British system. In your elections, does the person who gets the most votes win here? Does that work well? Again, I will just end where I began. I'm puzzled. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. That was terrific. They loved it. Thank you. Gosh, well, our next speaker has a very difficult task following that. But I'm sure you'll welcome him very warmly. It is John Cridland, the Director General of the CBI.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's at this point that staying in bed this morning seems quite a good idea. So here's the last hope of a desperate man. I'm going to quote Jules Verne. I'm going to turn us briefly to Jules Verne's classic Around the World in 80 Days. Reeta, Verne's novel starts with a scene much like today, an early autumn gathering of highly respected personages, including many princes of trade, held at the London Reform Club, not so a million miles from here. And at that meeting, you'll recall, Phileas Fogg wagers £20,000 that he can circumnavigate the world in 80 days, returning to London by Saturday, the 21st of December. And today, believe it or not, and I said I was desperate, it's exactly 80 days until the last day of the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris on Friday, the 11th of December. And this time, it isn't just £20,000 that's at stake, but the chance to give the world a sustainable future, both environmentally and, forgive me, my job too, economically. Unlike Phileas Fogg, today's global challenges don't carry passports. They certainly don't stop at national borders. They need global solutions. So why then is Paris so important? I'm not going to go anywhere near where the Vice President went. I think he said it all for all of us. What I want to do, Reeta, in the time I have available, is just look at that hard-nosed business case for getting a good deal out of Paris. So here's my first question. What happens if we don't make progress? What happens if we stick our heads in the sand and just hope it all goes away? Well, the costs are as clear as they are catastrophic. For businesses, the value at risk costs could exceed £4.5 trillion by the end of this century. Supermarket chain Asda estimates that 95% of its supply chain could be at risk from changing weather patterns and extreme events, as Al outlined. And we've already seen how global technology companies had to stop trading when flooding in Thailand shut down the factories they relied on. Besides the costs of inaction, the benefits of seizing the opportunities of the green economy are also clear. We know that the UK's green economy has sales of over £120 billion a year already. The green economy is a high-growth emerging market in its own right. It grows by about 7% a year compared to GDP growth of less than 3%. We've got 164 countries with renewable energy targets. That's 164 potential markets worldwide for our renewable industry. And the green economy has so much more potential, whether it's renewable power, low-carbon transport, sustainable goods and services, or ideas that none of us have even yet thought of. And a global climate deal, the thing that brought us here today, can, as the Vice President said, turbocharge this. On climate change, avoiding the costs and seizing the benefits means taking the right action. And since 2009, I think we've come a long way. The cost of solar and wind have plummeted. Electric vehicles have become a reality. Smart grids and the Internet of Things are transforming modern life. Our emissions are falling. Our economy is growing, and they are not in conflict. We've seen real progress by many of the companies in this room. We've seen energy-intensive companies like steel, cement, and glass setting out how they too can reduce their emissions. And we did see progress in the last Parliament. We've built on the 2008 Climate Change Act to develop policies which will decarbonise our economy. It was an example of showing leadership, and the government helped give business the certainty that business needs to invest. And it's important to say, as the Vice President did, that over many years the UK has built up real credibility on climate leadership and low-carbon investment. Hard won, but easily lost. And despite the progress so far, today's investors, the investors I have the privilege to speak for, are more uncertain about the UK's low-carbon future. We've heard it already this morning. The rollback of renewables to the mixed messages on energy efficiency, these changes send a worrying signal about the UK, Reeta, as a place for low-carbon investment. Moreover, this seemingly weakened commitment risks impacting our standing on the global stage. I think we've just had the best lecture on that we could have had, at the exact moment when we need to stand up and be counted. Yet in the last 7 years, we've seen remarkable progress. Whilst in the UK, in 2008, the UK was the only country with a Climate Change Act. Now we're not. Others have joined that crusade, from Finland to Mexico. Indeed, one of the big lessons from Copenhagen was that change can't be imposed on countries. The drive for change needs to come from the ground up. And now, as we run into Paris, 55 countries have made commitments to the UN about their intended nationally determined contribution. And an exciting title, hiding the fact that those 55 countries already account for 60% of global emissions. We've got in the European Union the 2030 targets we need, with the emissions trading system supporting reductions. And China, the world's largest emitter of CO2, has a plan to cap emissions by the end of the next decade or sooner. And in the US, President Obama's Clean Power Plan, which I agree should survive legal challenge, will cut America's power sector emissions by a third by 2030. So looking then to Paris, I believe we're in a much better place politically than we were 6 years ago. Our political leaders won't be heading to Paris expecting to thrash out all the details in a last-minute panic, as was the case in Copenhagen. We know there's still hard work to be done, but negotiators have been working hard for months. More groundwork has been laid and a much better understanding of countries' mutual concerns. At the moment, one of industry's biggest worries is that if some countries go faster than others, it undermines competitiveness. Not a reason to do nothing, but certainly a reason to get everybody together. A real concern. Yet if all countries pull in the right direction, we can make sure that where there are costs, the burden is shared more evenly. Paris should give firms the certainty, clarity, and confidence they need to invest. It should be a crucial opportunity for every nation to play their part to tackle climate change. In 80 days, we want to see negotiators heading back to Charles de Gaulle Airport with 3 wins in their back pocket. First, a long-term foundation for reducing emissions with agreement on how to ratchet up ambition on a regular basis. Second, a commitment to driving forward carbon pricing around the world. Whilst a truly global carbon market isn't realistic in the short term, it must remain our long-term ambition. And third, a solution for making finance and innovation the way we will make progress, making that innovation more accessible. Today, just 10% of climate finance flows from OECD countries to developing countries. We have to make sure developing countries can access the financial support they need for low-carbon energy and adaptation measures, especially from the private sector. And what I hope Paris can offer is a way to assess nations' efforts and to show how they're meeting the goals they themselves have set. Regular reviews will be important for making sure that countries are on track. And where more can be done, countries should be pressed to do so, safe in the knowledge that everyone at long last is pulling their weight. Maybe a glass half full view of what Paris can achieve. We need to be realistic. We're talking about good, not perfect, but I do think the optics are better than they've been for a while. Reeta, I started my comments by mentioning Around the World in 80 Days. You'll remember that at the end of Verne's novel, Phileas Fogg returns to London thinking he's too late. He's lost his bet. When at the 11th hour, Passepartout reminds him he's travelled east around the world. He crossed the date line. He still has 1 day to spare. In the real world, we can't rely on chance to save us at the last moment. Avoiding tomorrow's worst-case scenarios means taking action today, here and now. Paris won't be the end of the journey. It's simply another step. It's a chance to give businesses long-term clarity, drive investment, drive innovation, and raise our ambition. Like Verne's novel, the journey won't be easy. There are many challenges, many questions. How can we help developing nations get the support they need? How should nations be required to show that they're cutting emissions? These questions need answers, but of equal importance is to keep our eye on the prize. I'm no Al Gore, but I believe it is important that business adds its voice to the chorus of organisations and individuals speaking out here today. Politicians and negotiators should be confident that UK business is behind them. Business also needs the confidence that a Paris deal will provide the long-term certainty that business needs to help the rest of society find the solutions. 80 days from now, on the 11th of December, I want the ink to have dried on a deal in Paris. Like most things in life, the deal won't be perfect. Imperfection is the price of negotiation. But by working together, I'm reasonably optimistic we can drive ourselves towards the pro-growth, low-carbon future that business wants and the planet needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. John, not taking questions, of course, as you can see, and neither will our next speaker, but we will after that have a panel discussion where I will invite more questions from the floor, so do please save up anything that you have to ask. I know that there are people who wanted to ask Al Gore questions and I wasn't able to call you. I'm sorry about that. So our next speaker is Loretta Minghella, and she's Chief Executive of Christian Aid.
Thank you, Reeta, and good morning, everyone. Thank you to Green Alliance and to CBI for organising today's event and for the invitation to speak to you all. I've recently returned from the Philippines on a visit to see the recovery work that Christian Aid has been doing in response to the massive typhoon Haiyan, which struck there at the end of 2013. Over 6,000 people died, over 6 million people were forced from their homes, leaving lives and livelihoods ruined. 18 months on, I found high-quality, well-kept transitional housing in place and people beginning to earn a living again, no longer just relying on handouts. In Tacloban, one of the places hardest hit, I was welcomed by hundreds of genuinely smiling and grateful people. It took only the gentlest of questions for their smiles to evaporate, for the tales of bereavement and trauma to pour out. I learnt that every day people still talk about what happened that day the typhoon hit, their lucky escapes, the not-so-lucky ones they lost. In this coastal community, the typhoon had whipped up a huge body of water 6 meters high, which had swept in, wrecking homes and carrying people upwards and inland at the same time, claiming many victims on the way. One woman told me that for her, it had been a case of swimming along in this body of water, with her 4 children calling out, "Mum, Mum, how long do we have to keep on swimming?" And she said, "Just a bit longer, just a bit longer." And she said to me, "I didn't know how I would keep on swimming." And then very quietly, I still don't know how I kept on swimming. And then came the challenging question, so what are you doing about climate change? Because she knows, as I know, that climate change is making extreme weather events like Haiyan more and more likely, and that without urgent and radical action to cut carbon emissions, it will only ever be a matter of time until another massive typhoon strikes there. Everywhere I've travelled to see Christian Aid's work, I've seen the seriously damaging impacts of climate change on the lives of the world's poorest people. I've seen the impacts on water and food and land. I've seen the social impacts of migration, insecurity, malnutrition. But most importantly, I've also seen the poorest people willing to do what's necessary to overcome climate change, to adopt new farming techniques, diversify their crops, use new sources of energy, plant literally millions of trees, to work hard to mitigate the risk of disaster and to improve their capacity to respond if the worst happens. It's a struggle, but these people have in common a clear decision. They choose a better future for their children and their communities. This week, we get a chance to follow them. In just a few days' time, leaders of the world, including our Prime Minister, will be launching the new Sustainable Development Goals in New York. 15 years ago, the world agreed a set of goals for the new millennium. It was a moment of optimism, of hope, possibly even, dare I say it, naivety. But there was a conviction that a transformed future was just around the corner, well within our grasp. 15 years on, we have much to celebrate. Nearly 1 billion people lifted out of poverty, maternal mortality down 45% worldwide, infant mortality more than halved. Successive governments here in the UK, including the current government, deserve huge credit for the leadership role they've played in setting the development agenda and delivering their share of the requisite finance which lies behind these significant achievements. Yet we've also learned that the challenges are in some ways more complex, more interdependent and more political than we imagined in the year 2000. We've learned that even as many lifted themselves out of poverty, many were left behind, including too many women and girls, and the richest got richer still. We've learned that working together means not just governments or celebrities or international civil society organisations like Christian Aid, but businesses and investors and southern movements. And we've also come to understand that the climate we are changing threatens all the progress made, not just over the last 15 years, but over the last 50. We may also feel that we are in another, perhaps less innocent time. Fear is the dominant mood. Today, the future can often seem like something to be avoided, and we anchor in the now and the very near term, as if we hope by doing so to dodge the painful realities that the future seems to hold in store. We shore up the banking system for another few days here. We run up some fences and barbed wire over there, increasingly defended against the demands which as a human family we make of one another. The historian Professor Tim Snyder caught it when he said, "The future now clings to us, heavy with complications and crises, dense with dilemmas and disappointments." And in our highly materialistic society, we soothe our fears by living out what Christian Aid Chair Rowan Williams has called our fantasy of an endlessly adjustable world in which every physical boundary can be renegotiated. But the challenge of climate change makes us look at the Sustainable Development Goals and consider what kind of future we are going to choose. Are these goals just a restyling of the old ones, or do they express the needs of the moment? Will we seek to preserve our own dignity by shielding ourselves from the desperate demands of those to whom dignity is currently denied? Or will we seize the goals and the chance of an ambitious deal in Paris and rise to the unprecedented challenges of our world with courage and vision? No amount of scientific evidence or business investment can answer these questions for us. They are questions for the whole of humanity. I can't answer those questions for you, but I want to offer 3 reflections. Firstly, if we're going to face the future resiliently, we're going to have to do so together. Too many events like these feature someone like me giving the civil society view, someone else talking from a business perspective, and a government spokesperson as well. Yes, all 3 have valuable perspectives, but it's when we have real dialogue and move outside our own perspectives that real, exciting change happens. We do have to embrace new and more imaginative and more integrated approaches that bring sectors together continuously in a shared endeavour. No more silos. As the Chief Executive of Christian Aid, not a day goes by when my organisation is not engaging with the private sector, academia, government departments, churches, other faith groups, think tanks and grassroots organisations, and we find common cause in unexpected places. To take just one example, right across the business and NGO communities, there has emerged a strong and shared desire for clarity on plans for the low-carbon economy. I'm not sure that the government has yet understood the significance of the strength of our united voice. Clear and stable policy frameworks enable investment, proper planning, shifts in business behaviour. Any long-term economic plan needs a corresponding environmental plan with strategies and milestones which everyone can interrogate and, in many cases, literally buy into. That wouldn't only facilitate bold business and investment decisions of the kind John spoke about, but also help civil society carry out its important task of holding other actors to account. So I make a plea to government to recognise that there's a genuine offer of partnership on climate policy making, bringing businesses and NGOs and government together in a more meaningful way. But we will need greater openness from our government than we have been seeing about the pathway it now intends us to travel to secure a low-carbon future. Because what's happening at the moment just doesn't seem to hang together, and without a vision, the people perish. Secondly, the thing that businesses and the poorest people in the world have in common is the desire that we do indeed have a future, so that short-term cost, whilst relevant, cannot in the end be prioritised over the long-term thinking, commitment and investment required for our survival. There may be some whose horizons of success are somewhat shorter, but short-termism has no serious place in climate politics. The Sustainable Development Goals are for the next 15 years. The Paris Climate Agreement doesn't even take effect until 2020 and may well include a long-term goal for 2050 or even the end of the century. So yes, it is easy to fix on the Paris climate deal itself, rather than the trust that underpins it and the action that flows from it. But climate change won't be solved by a deal in Paris, or in fact by any single decision. Paris must be a pivotal moment, a springboard to further ambition and deeper engagement, and yet it's what we all do in the light of Paris that will determine our future. We need to be in it for the long haul. And finally, we need to rise to meet the risks ahead with courage and with hope. Typhoon Haiyan was the worst typhoon in recorded history, and we're only at 0.8 degrees of warming. Our world is heading for the horrors of 3 degrees of warming, and the pledges being made ahead of the Paris summit are currently far short of what is necessary to keep us safe and with a chance of flourishing. The risks to our shared future are very real. The world's poorest people don't have insurance policies which kick in when disaster strikes. Their insurance is the conscience of you and me, of world leaders and governments, that we will commit to them and to each other to do whatever is necessary to cut emissions and contribute equitably to the costs of adaptation and mitigation. That we have to change is a hugely inconvenient truth. But for all of us, there is another truth, a more hopeful one. Bringing human dignity and the survival of our planet into the centre of all our thinking will bring new opportunities for all of us, governments, businesses, and civil society. It's the only kind of future worth contemplating. This week, we can expect to see rock stars and faith leaders and all the big political names hail the global goals and point towards the importance of the Paris deal. Let it be not just a big moment that comes and goes. Let it be the moment for a change of heart when we say, "We hear you, you matter, and you don't have to keep on swimming anymore."
Thank you very much, Loretta Minghella, for a speech that I think was very much from the heart. Could I invite our panel members up to the stage now, please? So Ben, you are now a replacement for someone. I haven't realised. Okay. And it's what's the Okay, so I'm joined now by Ben Goldsmith from the Conservative Environment Network, by Michael Jacobs, who is Senior Advisor with the New Climate Economy, by Andrew Bonfield, who's Global Finance Director of National Grid, and I should have said earlier that National Grid is also supporting this event, and also by Dame Fiona Reynolds, who's Chair of Green Alliance. I'm going to ask a few questions to get a bit of discussion going, and I'm going to throw it open to you, so do please come up with questions. I'm going to start, Ben Goldsmith, with you because of that gauntlet thrown down by Al Gore, of course, that whole list of policies that he said had either been cancelled or weakened. What is going on with UK green policy at the moment?
Well, we should have Oliver Letwin sitting here, and he could answer for us. And in fact, Oliver's been hugely supportive of some of the things that we in the Conservative Environment Network have championed. So I'm not sure we want to be too tough on him. So let me just explain what the Conservative Environment Network is. It's a semi-formal grouping of people who consider themselves to be broadly defined conservatives, who feel passionately about the environment, and who consider that conservatism is to do with things like responsibility towards future generations, resilience, a stewardship of the natural environment and other common assets, and so on. We are not really yet a formal organization, but we do have good convening power. We've got some great people around us, former ministers, members of parliament, members of the House of Lords, intellectuals and activists like Ben Caldecott here. And what we've sought to do is act as a conduit into the Conservative Party for groups that have great ideas that we think are enactable. So we've got some work going on with the Green Alliance around energy and resource efficiency, particularly dealing with Sajid Javid and his productivity agenda. We've got some work going on around trying to encourage the party to bring about an accelerated end to unabated coal-fired power generation. We've worked with the RSPB and with the Blue Marine Foundation to encourage the party to bring about the creation of some huge marine protected areas in the southern oceans around what remains of our empire, and so on. But it's been opportunistic. We all have day jobs, and what's exciting, I think, is that in the next 3 or 4 months, we'll be able to announce that we're forming ourselves into more of an executive organization.
So in a way, you do have the unenviable job of being, in a sense, a proxy for Oliver Letwin. He ought to be here. Sadly, this falls to you. Back to my first question, which was really, when you look at UK policy at the moment, what do you think?
I must say, I find it devastating. I kind of hope they've got a plan. I go to bed at night thinking, I hope they've got a plan. Because they've scrapped some of the most exciting things that have been done in the last 4 or 5 years. Some of the best pieces of work of the coalition government, the creation of a green investment bank, the introduction of the renewable heat incentive, the support for solar, and especially small-scale solar. All of this stuff was very exciting, and it's been scrapped. Supposedly they've run out of money. I hope they've got something cooking, and I don't know that they do. The idea that we've run out of money is crap. You know, they've offered £95 a megawatt hour for power that's... I mean, if you look at the deal on the table for the Hinkley nuclear power station, which makes me feel particularly uncomfortable given I live within about 50 miles of it, £95 a megawatt hour, inflation-linked for 35 years, I think the period is. And that's without taking into account the fact that similar plants elsewhere, built by the same people, have taken twice as long to build as they said they would, and have cost twice as much to build. So if there's no money, how can they offer that kind of deal to nuclear? And let's not even talk about fossil fuel subsidies, you know, of the order of 8 or 10 times greater than that provided to renewables at the moment per annum. So
okay, good. Well, thank you. Thank you for your honesty. And I must say, we were expecting a government minister here today. Clearly, for some reasons, he's not here. Michael Jacobs, can we look forward then to Paris and say, you know, what would a good climate deal look like, and what would it look like for Britain?
I think it's very important to understand the nature of the deal that we're going to get in Paris. This is not a solution to climate change. we are not negotiating what countries are individually going to do. And this is a big shift from the model that we had in Kyoto, where there was a global negotiation of the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions, and then a negotiation around what each country would be allowed to contribute to that global total. The model we have now is one in which every country is doing its own thing. We have these, as John Cridland said, intended nationally determined contributions, INDCs, which are national climate pledges. And these are now being brought forward. Most countries, major countries, have now announced theirs. And this is a recognition that making climate policy to reduce emissions is difficult, it is different in every country, it requires domestic political support, and it has to be done at national level. So that's a recognition of the reality of moving in that direction, but it comes with a huge problem, which is when we add up all these national pledges that are being made, they don't add up to anything like enough to put us on a path to even a 50% chance of holding global warming to the 2 degrees that the international community has agreed. So there is a paradox at the heart of this process. Nationally determined is absolutely right, but it's not sufficient globally. And if the judgment on the deal is, do all these pledges add up to 2 degrees, then we're going to be disappointed. And everybody knows that, and that's why this agreement contains, and what the real negotiations are about, is the rules that require every country to improve these pledges over time. And the real prize in Paris is not these national pledges, which won't be enough, and everybody will have to say that. It's do the rules that they're negotiating, that are the content of the agreement, require every country to come back every 5 years, every country to come back every 5 years with a better national climate commitment than they had last time, further extended in time, and with deeper cuts. And not only for future periods, but does the agreement require us to revise the ones we've already put forward? So the EU has its 2030 targets. Will the EU be required to come back in perhaps 2018 to say, okay, let's look again, let's see whether the technologies, the economic costs and so on allow us to go further, not backwards, but further. And so that's going to be, in a sense, the real test of the agreement. The commitments that countries are making now are not enough. Does this agreement require every country to do more in the future so that the long-term ambition, which is to decarbonize the global economy completely, can be seen to be on track in the future?
And is that going to be a sticking point, that ratcheting up?
That is where the big debates are. I mean, they're also over finance, as Loretta said, you know, the contribution of developed countries to developing countries. There are a lot of issues, but the heart of it in terms of are we tackling climate change in terms of mitigating greenhouse gases is, does the agreement require countries to come back and do more? And that is still the main point of the negotiations at this point.
Okay. Fiona Reynolds, can you pick up a bit on what Loretta Minghella was talking about, you know, what a deal would mean for the developing world?
Well, clearly, the whole moral obligation, I thought it was important, actually, the Vice President reminded us there's a moral obligation here, was about the commitment that we need to make internationally. And I think that, you know, Loretta made the case extremely strongly. And that, too, is one of the issues about John Cridland, also the flows of money, the commitments that we make about the investment and support for developing countries. But in a way, I wanted to come back to a point that emerged earlier, because one of the things as the developing world can do, and Loretta made this point too, is actually how we as citizens behave and respond to this challenge. Because although, you know, enough has been said about the ambiguity of the current government's position, but I think one of the audiences who are most confused by that is the public at large in this country, who thought we were clearer about where we were going towards Paris. And I think we misjudge, actually, people's motivations. There's a sort of belief that all we want is material goods. All we want is more gadgets and to drive ever bigger cars. But actually, I think the people of this country are both more sophisticated and more human than that. And I think there's a lot of evidence that suggests that actually people don't think that we're all going to get richer and that that's the only thing that matters. And we can see evidence in the growth of the voluntary sector, in the way that people spend their time, you know, getting out into the countryside, the passion for nature, the way that people care about the things that are vitally important but money can't buy. And actually, if we can harness people's willingness to look at more sustainable lifestyles and to be more engaged with the non-material things of life, I think we'll be doing more potentially for this sort of sense of global equity than, you know, the sort of technical arguments that we keep talking about. And, you know, the biodiversity challenge is really crucial. We're not even on track to stop biodiversity losses by 2020. So we need to link these debates together And people are inspired by nature, about landscape, about beauty. And if we can harness that, we will actually, I think, stand a greater chance of creating the political context within which the deal will be struck and future improvements will be made.
But do you think we are going to have to sacrifice much more than we realise in terms of the material ways in which we live?
I think the word sacrifice is a really important one. I would like to believe, and some of the technological improvements will enable us to have more efficient appliances, more, if you like, a more balanced approach to life. But I think my fundamental point is I'm not sure that every human being's aspiration in life is simply about consumption and simply about having more and consuming faster. I think there's a real opportunity to reach out to people and say, actually, it's a better quality of life that we can achieve that's not about sacrifice, but about doing different things in different ways, and that will play a part in this vision.
Okay, thank you. And Andrew Bonfield, National Grid, where do you see technological change as contributing to allowing renewables to be more part of our energy supply?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the first quarter of this year, we saw 4 gigawatts of additional solar PV coming onto the network. So we went from about 2 gigawatts to 6 gigawatts in 1 quarter, 3 months. We think we're about 18 to 24 months away from grid parity between solar PV and other forms of generation. Now, unfortunately for us in the UK, it's not necessarily the optimum choice of generation because obviously you need to have a mixture of base load from other renewable sources as well. But obviously, it is something that we've seen as a massive change. It's had some significant impact on the way we manage the grid itself. For those of you who've ever seen those big boards we have out in Wokingham, where we actually look to show where we are managing the grid, actually every day we have predictions based on weather now of what the impact of solar is going to be on how we actually manage the overall network. So it's happening, and it is out there, and we will continue to see change happening, particularly as the cost of these new renewables comes down. I think the challenge for us, and this is back to the societal challenge, and this is the political challenge as well, is democratic cycles tend to last 5 years in most of the Western world, and yet we live in an environment where business has to make 40 to 60-year decisions. And the energy trilemma is still there. It's about sustainability, it's about affordability, and it's about security of supply and balancing the three. The problem in the debate politically often is one of those becomes the flavor of the month, and that then drives a lot of behavior. And unfortunately, what we do need is actually a full and open discussion, I think politically, about what all of this means, what Paris means for all of us as individuals, what it means for business, what it means for affordability, and what it means for sustainability, and how can we manage that all together? Because actually at that time, we will actually be aligning the general public, business, and government into the right level and the right place so that we can actually drive this. This is something we have to do. I think business is committing to a greater degree than ever before around climate change. We need this to happen. How do we make it happen? And that debate needs to be transparent and open.
Okay, thank you. Could I invite questions from the floor, please? So there is a roving microphone, so there are a couple of hands going up immediately back there. So if I'll take those 3 at the back on the left to start with, and then subsequently I'll take you, if you can see yourselves, 2 hands back here and 1 there. Okay, thank you. And do say your name and where you're from, please.
Yes, Henry Pomeroy from the NGO Chase Africa. Do the panel members think that issues of human population levels have an impact on energy targets and climate change? What should we do about it when so many people don't have free access to family planning services?
Okay, thanks, yep. And there were 2 more back there in that same bit. Yes, well.
Matthew Lockwood from the University of Exeter. My question is really about the international negotiations. The Montreal Protocol worked well in the end because it had good mechanisms to get countries to get involved and then to penalize them if they didn't follow through. And my question really is, do we have that? Will we have that at Paris? And if not, are we really just relying on sort of conscience and goodwill?
Okay, yes, thank you. And there was one more again. Yes, this person here. I'm so sorry, I can't see terribly well, which is I'm pointing in a slightly vague way. Great.
Hi, I'm Stephen Tyndale. I'm a freelance climate campaigner. I'd like to ask about the moral language that Al Gore used. He said it's a moral choice between right and wrong. I know Fiona mentioned this as well. It's very encouraging to hear moral language from a politician or recovering politician, as Al Gore describes himself. Have any of the panel heard any moral language on climate change from any politician in the UK, from any political party? Because I haven't.
Okay, good question. Should we take them in reverse? I'll ask you all about the moral language. Maybe Fiona, if you talk about population, and Michael about penalties. Ben, do you want to talk about moral language?
Allow me with the hard one first.
Yes.
I'm not sure there is a whole lot of morality swinging around in Parliament around environmental issues. I mean, if you take the environmental question down to kind of basic nature, as these guys at the front, the former and previous heads of RSPB will tell you, everything's on the decline. I think there's a tremendous moral question around the kind of world we're going to leave our children, on our doorstep, and I really haven't heard much language around that within Parliament. I think we've got work to do. That's why a group of us are really trying to create an organisation that can raise the environment up the list of priorities, certainly on the centre-right side of the political spectrum.
Fiona, Andrew?
Well, I mean, actually, our Green MP actually is talking in moral terms about this, so we mustn't forget her. But I think, actually, I really like hearing the moral case, because I think Al Gore made the point that many of the huge shifts that we as a society have made over the last 100, 200 years, whether on slavery or women's rights, and he quoted a number of them, have been because the moral case has emerged. And I think that in many ways we are in that space again. And I'm not sure it's right and wrong. I think that's perhaps too black and white, but I think certainly the voice of the underrepresented in society, the voice of the what might be sort of classed as minority interests, but I refuse to accept them, but the sort of environmental case deserves more space, and I think we can and should raise that. And if politicians won't, then the NGOs surely will. But just to pick up, as you asked, on population, I still believe that one of the biggest challenges here is distribution of resources as much as absolute levels. And my expertise is in the UK rather than internationally, but I would say that we have to, I think, learn draw some of the lessons from the past about how we manage population pressure in a small island. And actually there are ways of using land much more effectively and sustainably.
I think the question wasn't about the UK, was it? It was about global population. Is that right? Yes.
I'm probably not the right person to ask about global populations. It's still a matter of distribution of food, of resources, and we can do that much more equitably than we have in the past.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask about the moral question. Is it partly because we don't have very many young people active in political life, and it is the young generation whose real problem this is going to be?
Well, what I would say, actually, it's a moral obligation on all of us. I wouldn't rather point out to politicians. I would actually look at it across the broader spectrum. Leaders in the country, that's business leaders as well. We need to make sure that people understand we run businesses, but we run businesses that need to last for a long period of time. That is how we generate real value for the owners of our business and the stakeholders in our business. It is not taking short-term decisions. It's about taking long-term decisions that last, and the implication of climate change is a long-term business issue that we're all going to face with. The reality of climate change is that our businesses are not going to exist in the same form that they are today if we don't make that change. And that's going to have we have to think about how do we act in that situation. So I think it's a moral obligation on all of us. I think the other side of it, with two recently married children, we do have a responsibility for the next generation, and we do need to think about, that generational shift, and we need to listen to the voice of our customers. And our customers are young people as well. It's not just the older generation, it is younger people. It's about how do you hear that and bring that through into your business model.
Okay, thank you. Michael, would you deal with the question from Matthew about penalties?
Yes, I think it's very important to understand this. There won't be a compliance procedure with any kind of rigor or penalties in it in the Paris Agreement. Matthew, you're right that the Montreal Protocol does include those, but they've not been used because countries have complied and nobody has wanted to point the finger at non-compliance. It's not what is done in international law except with pariah states, and we're dealing with all major countries. And we know that if we had severe penalties and compliance regime in the agreement, then what countries would say they're going to do would be drastically weakened to ensure that they were never put into a penalty regime. So actually compliance is the enemy of ambition. And what I think is really important to recognize here, which is the big shift between Kyoto and Paris, is in Kyoto, we really didn't know the answer to Al Gore's second question, which was, can we do it? We were taking a punt on the possibility that in the future we might be able to reduce emissions. We do now know that we can reduce emissions, and very, very drastically. And we know, as Andrew has pointed out, to be within 24 months of parity between solar and fossil fuels in Britain. Britain is not the most solar gain, we're the country with the most solar gain. Shows us, as Al Gore also said, that we are reaching a point where the economics of going low carbon are completely different. And therefore, what the agreement has got to do is not put countries into a position where their targets are subject to an international compliance regime, but give them and their investors and businesses the incentives to invest in low carbon. And the way we will see targets reached is not through the formality of the agreement, but because countries start putting in place the policies that start releasing the investment, that create the incentives for businesses, that create the incentives for technological innovation, and so on. And a point of the agreement is to create the conditions for national investment and for international investment flows. And that's what is now beginning to happen, as Al Gore said. It's in the US, it's in China, it's in many countries, and what we need to do is to do that on an international scale with a timetable that keeps putting pressure on those processes. And so this is a very different kind of agreement. It's an agreement that will unleash investment, and that's its point. And as John Cridland said, this is what businesses want out of it. They don't want, they're not interested in a compliance regime. What they want to know is, where's China going? Where are the markets going to be in China? Where's the US going? Where are the markets going to be there? And the agreement cements that and makes it universal. It makes sure that every country is moving in that direction. And we've already seen this. These nationally intended determined contributions are doing things that national political processes would not have done. We would not have seen the kind of announcements we've already had out of Brazil, we're about to have out of India and so on, without that process. So the agreement is a different kind of beast from the ones that we've had in the past, and it's actually all about making the economic investments real. And can I just then segue to the moral question? The moral question is really important. Stephen, you will remember a politician called Gordon Brown. I worked with him. He wanted to make the moral case for this. But he made it when he was convinced of the economic case. And that's because in the real world of business and investment and politics, the economic case really matters. It's hard to do things on pure moral grounds. Let's go back to slavery, as Al Gore referred to. Britain led the abolition of the slave trade because we knew that we could do business without it. And in the end, it's when the moral case comes together with an economic case that you get change, and politicians are emboldened to make the changes. And the fantastic thing about the world we're living in now, as Al Gore said, is you can make the economic case, you can make the business case, capitalism is finding the answers. And I'm afraid that is a much more reliable route to political decisions and to the flows of capital we need very, very quickly than the pure moral case, important though that is.
Okay, thank you. More questions, please. Now, I did promise somebody, and I've forgotten who maybe it was this woman here at the front, and then we'll take the man there, and then we will have time to come to you. But keep the questions short, please, and I might get the answers to be a bit shorter too. Thank you.
Joanna Lewis from Food for Life at the Soil Association. Food and farming account for about 20 to 30% of the UK's climate impact. Obesity is a cross-government priority. Number 10 and the Department of Health are promising a childhood obesity strategy by the end of the year. I'm wondering if we should do more to align these two agendas.
Okay. And then, gentleman there.
Sunil Kansal from Sept. US has tougher anti-smog laws, and they have been fairly successful in ensuring that the polluting vehicle, they stay off-road, they stay in junkyard, not on the road. Now, recently they obviously detected, what the Volkswagen was doing. They were trying to cheat the system and make sure that they pass through the tougher anti-smoke laws in the US. So my question is, why can't we have Europe-wide tougher anti-smoke laws? And yes, obviously the politicians, they want to make sure that that the businesses are growing and there's a growth in the GDP, but are they ready to take tougher action if the other car manufacturers are also doing the same? So, I mean, really, it's not just the Volkswagen. I'm sure there are so many other car manufacturers. They may also not be complying with such laws.
So just to be clear, you want to know should the government be taking tougher action to make sure that people are complying, that companies are complying?
Yes, yeah, and bringing the tougher anti-smoke laws.
Okay, lovely. And there was another one just there. Thank you.
Thanks. John Alker from the UK Green Building Council. John Cridland made a really important point, I think, that business should add its voice to, I think, what he called the sort of chorus today. So I just wanted to sort of pick up on that and I guess mainly perhaps ask Mike, what is the role for business leadership in supporting a strong outcome from Paris, the sort of outcome that you've spoken about? What more could our business leaders do and those of us that work with them?
Okay, thank you. Do you want to take that one, Andrew?
Well, okay, I mean, I think it's about making sure that we have a climate where we are open to change and to see change happen. I think it's about making sure that those leaders who passionately believe in this their voices are going to be heard. And again, I think John's point about the economic argument just needs to be reinforced again and again and again about making this happen. I'll just make a comment on cars. I think one of the things I would just say is we probably should actually be moving longer term to electric vehicles. Then the emissions issue goes away. If we do move to that, that probably is the solution.
Fiona, yes,
the food
please do.
Farming. I mean,
Yes.
The answer is yes and more alignment actually on farming, because you're quite right, there are issues about obesity, issues about food production, but also there's issues about the role of farming in acting as a carbon store and a sink. I mean, soil is perhaps the resource that gets forgotten in all of these debates, but is the most important foundation for life itself. And actually sustainable farming, which delivers both good management of land, good outcomes for biodiversity and the natural environment, but also healthy food that people are involved with, a transparent food chain. I mean, there are just so many good reasons to align those policies and actually create something that is much better, both in the sort of big picture climate sense, but also for those of us who live in a country that's dependent on food production, but also enjoying the environment it offers. So yes is the answer.
I just add, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a climate skeptic right over to kind of Nigel Lawson at the kind of hard end of the Conservative Party that doesn't agree that we need to stop cutting down the world's rainforests. He wouldn't say that's for climate reasons, it's for hydrological reasons and lost biodiversity reasons and all that stuff. Similarly, farming is, as you pointed out, it's a huge emitter, and we need to stop ploughing up the world's soils and losing them down rivers and into the sea and into the atmosphere. Again, those will have a massive contribution on reducing emissions. And I think we can probably find much more consensus in that area than we can around some of the thornier issues that we've been discussing today. And I'm not sure enough attention is focused on land use in tackling climate change.
Thank you. Michael, do you want to pick up on the point about, Volkswagen and tougher emissions laws?
Yes, this is a very instructive case, isn't it? There are all the car companies have been championing their green credentials over the last few years. They were pushed into it by governments when they were in trouble, and they're very slick with their marketing. And we now discover the truth underneath. Now, this tells us that even companies that proclaim their values and so on will try and escape the rules. And this is true more or less universally because the incentives are so great to do so. And this just shows us that, the moral case is not enough, the economic case is not enough. We need to regulate and we need to enforce. And, we, European and American legislators, did not look closely enough at the way in which their own regulations were actually being tested and so on. So this is a good lesson for all the champions of corporate responsibility and good business practice. Yes, but it needs a base of very strong regulatory regulation. and enforcement. So this case, and VW has been the one exposed, but it isn't the only one. They are all doing it. All the car companies are doing it. And, you know, it was Transport and Environment and the ITTC, the NGOs, the environment and transport NGOs who exposed this and who showed. So this is a very interesting case about how, yes, capitalism will solve this problem, but only if it is managed and controlled quite well to do these things. I want to come to the question about business and what its role is. So firstly, we need a business voice talking about what's currently happening in UK climate and energy policy. We've got a situation, not least thanks to the CBI, which has been an incredibly progressive voice on this. And John, who is leaving the CBI soon, deserves a huge amount of credit for positioning the CBI as a champion of environmental and low-carbon policy, sensible, business-oriented and so on, but nevertheless putting them in a position where they are not simply opposing all the regulatory reforms, as some business organizations still do. But you now need to be vocal. And business has always found a bit of difficulty being really vocal in policy, in policy debates and so on, except when it comes to, you know, the things that really make them losses immediately. And this is the moment where the business voice really does need to be heard. You know, Al Gore says he's puzzled. We can use other words. There is clearly something going on here which is very regressive, and business needs to be out there because the green NGO voice is not sufficient anymore. It's not sufficient partly because the government is not listening to it, but also because it is the business case that will convince this government. So I'd like to see businesses out there in this period vocal about what's happening on policy, as well as lobbying inside, and calling, as John has done, for a strong Paris Agreement. The other thing that I think is really crucial for business, and particularly in your own sector, which is already committed in this field, is what you say immediately after Paris. The week after Paris, and the month after Paris, and the 3 months after Paris will determine whether or not it's a success. Because Paris in itself will not be some big bang moment in which we can say, well, we've solved climate change, and nobody's expecting it to be such, the question of how it's interpreted will be as important as what is written in the agreement. And the point of Paris, as I've tried to say, is to create expectations amongst businesses and investors that the world is going in a low-carbon direction, faster than it's done before, and with a regular ratcheting up mechanism to make it further. That's the point. It's to give businesses and investors that confidence of where we're going, and it's the business and investor voice immediately after Paris saying, yes, that is what it's doing, that will determine whether the journalists and whether the skeptics and whether the high-carbon industries, how they report it. And it'll be very easy to report it for 2 days. We'll report on the politics and so on, and then the FT and the Economist and the BBC will start questioning, well, does it really make a difference? And that's when you want business voices saying, yes, it does. We're now going for low-carbon. Our high-carbon investments, we think, are more at risk than they used to be. We can see the global markets we're going to invest and so on. So the business voice immediately after Paris will be as important as anything you can do beforehand.
Splendid. All right, thank you. So I'm going to go for 3 right at the back there, back row, and then 2 in front, and then I'll come to a little section here, and then we may have to wrap it up.
Anthony Hobley, Chief Executive of the Carbon Tracker, the stranded asset analysts. Michael actually picked up a really important point, and I sort of joined this to what Al Gore said when he looked at telecoms, mobile telecoms, and sort of draw the parallel with sort of disruptive technologies. Does the panel think that what we're now seeing is major disruptive technologies coming through, and the incumbents, and I think business history tells us, the incumbents almost always fail to make that technological jump when you have disruptive technologies? Are they pushing back? Are we sort of seeing the red flags out for the clean technology, and do we have to have that really powerful clean energy business voice to push back against those incumbents?
Okay, thank you. Yes, and then it's somebody in the row just in front of him, and then it's a gentleman in front of him.
Thanks. Thank you, Richard Benwell for the RSPB. Al Gore set out quite a lengthy litany of things that the government has reversed on in the last few months that will have a climate change impact. But in the months to come, before Paris, there are still a number of decisions that could make a difference on climate change. So, for example, we have the feed-in tariff review still open till October, which could maintain some really important support for renewables. We have the establishment of a new Natural Capital Committee, which will be vital to set out plans for restoring biodiversity. We have the licensing conditions for shale gas extraction, which could still make good Amber Rudd's commitment to rule out fracking in triple SIs. And finally, we have a ministerial meeting on the Birds and Habitats Directives, which are absolutely vital, both for adapting to and mitigating climate change. Will the panel join me in encouraging the government to make good on those opportunities, because the eyes of Europe and on the world will be looking at these chances before Paris to make our contribution to a strong climate deal?
Okay, I don't know if that counts as a question, but anyway, okay, point taken, thank you. And then there's a gentleman here in the, there.
Hi, Geoffrey Lean of the Daily Telegraph, at least for the time being.
We need you there, Geoffrey.
I was riveted by Andrew Bonfield's statement about, I hadn't heard before, 18 to 24 months to grid parity, which coming from him is remarkable, I think. Can I press you a bit further and ask you about this big question of intermittency? At what point of renewables on the grid do you begin to worry about intermittency?
Okay, so I'm probably not the best technical expert to ask, and I'm sure that there'll be one of my colleagues in the audience who will give you the exact answer. But it is something we are having to watch already, because obviously, as you are in the situation where you bring more new renewables on, balancing becomes much more difficult, plus also frequency response is an issue. And there are some things we're doing at the moment to actually help that to sort of get us into the right place. On the disruptive technology part, the reality is we were doing some work on what we assess the impact of solar, battery storage, and new technologies would be on the grid. And we used to talk about that in a sort of 5 to 10 year view. We're talking about it in a much more short-term position today. And those things are happening. Now, is this going to be like mobile versus landline technology? Probably not in the energy space, but it is definitely happening. There are things that are moving on. It is moving faster than probably we all thought. And we are getting to a point where actually change is really happening because it's economically driven as well. So I think that's the most important message to take away.
Yes, Ben?
And also, I mean, on the point about disruption, innovation, I mean, Elon Musk, who I consider to be, I suppose, a Thomas Edison of our day, I wouldn't be the first to say that, said, attention US utility executives, your business model in 10 years will be as relevant as a rotary telephone, which perhaps goes one stage further than Andrew was saying. I certainly think you should look at where the smart money is. I mean, David Einhorn, Chris Hahn, Lewis Bacon, Jeremy Grantham, the real big league, smart New York, London investors. Look at the shareholder roster of Sun Edison, for example. They're all in there. They're all diverting their investment towards this exciting stuff. I think that's got to tell you something.
Okay. Does anyone want to address Richard's point about action on hold before Paris?
Yeah, well, I was going to pick up, I mean, the rhetorical answer, of course, is yes to your question again, but I think the interesting point you're underlying your question is that we've talked a lot about mitigation today, about the kind of big stories about how to get our emissions down, etc. But actually adaptation ultimately is going to be hugely important. How we cope with the change already in the system, how we minimize the risks of disruption. And there, as you said, the Natural Capital Committee's work, the whole question about habitats and biodiversity come absolutely into play. And, you know, we are all a bit shell-shocked, I think, by recent decisions. And I think if we see another set of further diminution of commitment, it will not only be very destabilizing for the bigger picture, as we've heard, but actually it will diminish our capacity long-term to set in place policies and frameworks that will ensure the sustainable management, particularly of land use. As Ben said, it's an under-discussed issue, but absolutely critical to our ability to survive and to manage our way through these very difficult but changing times.
Okay. I think I'll take another 3 questions and we may have to call it a day. There's a woman here at the front, please. Man there, and then gentleman here. Okay. And sorry to be arbitrary about this. Okay.
Hi, it's Eleanor Besley from 1010. I just wanted to pick up again, kind of off the back of the renewables question. Andrew, in the past you said that big baseload plants are kind of outdated now and decentralization is the way forward. But in the UK, we seem to be seeing gas as a bridging fuel, which is giving government more or less a free license for fracking. And I just wanted to see what the panel think about massive investment in gas and nuclear at the moment.
Okay, thank you. There was a gentleman there at the end, and then this man here. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Rahul Bansali from Atos Consulting. Just wanted to go back to the question about the business cycle and the political cycle, and questioned whether or not we need to start thinking about the regulatory planning cycles being stretched out to a more longer period, or allowance as we move into more of a total cost from CapEx and OpEx costings to a more total cost over a longer period of time, and what the panel think of that.
Okay, thank you. And yes?
Is it on? Hello? Yes, Charles Perry, founder of Second Nature. My question is, why is the British public largely in the dark about some of the truths that we've been talking about today? Take one example, Ben Goldsmith talked about fossil fuel subsidies. Joan Wally asked an earlier question. She was the chair of the Environment Audit Committee. They did a review into energy subsidies. The review was very clear. Many of us gave evidence to the review. And fossil fuel subsidies outweigh renewables several times in the UK. But very few people amongst the British public know this. So why do we feel that the British public are in the dark about these important truths? Is not a moral responsibility to make the British public aware?
Whose responsibility is that, Ben?
I mean, I think it's partly a question of political attention. I mean, if you look at survey after survey, the environment ranks pretty low on the list of priorities of most people, certainly according to the surveys that politicians commission from time to time. Evidence suggests that that's changing. They started teaching in schools in Britain nature and the environment in a more comprehensive way about the time that I was leaving school. I'm 35, so people kind of younger than me typically rank the environment higher up the list of priorities than those who are older than me. And that accelerates. I'm sure those people like me who have children kind of 10, 12, they understand about recycling, they understand about the impacts of deforestation on rainfall, they understand that the climate is changing, they understand about the extinction crisis. And I think that as those young people find their voice and become adults, I think the environment will become a higher priority issue. And then the general media and politicians and so on will give more credence to the issues that we all care about so much. I think we're at a tipping point in that sense. I think it's purely an interest thing at the moment.
Fiona?
Just pick up the point about long-term planning. I mean, the water companies, for example, have already moved to a TOTEX regime, you know, pushed to do so initially by Ofwat, but actually the opportunity, therefore, to look at catchment management, to look at much longer-term payback and much more sophisticated solutions is really beginning to come through. Just the other question I can't resist, just, you know, we don't need fracking in this country. We don't need more fossil fuels. We need to think about ways of getting ourselves, you know, off that ratchet, as we've heard so many times. And I think, you know, there may be cases for some, you know, talk about bridging, but I don't think fracking is a bridge.
Okay, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, we have an 8-year regulatory cycle, which is good. We like long regulatory cycles. We invest for 40 years plus, so 8 years is the minimum. And we have moved to a TOTEX environment as well. And what that's meant is in the first 2 years of our price control, we've saved £200 million for customers. So that is an opportunity for us as a business as well as actually for customers themselves. On this sort of comment on distributed generation, I think one of the challenges today still is we are starting on that journey. Obviously, without good battery storage, we can't go the whole way. So we are always going to need a bridging load, a factor, and there still will always need to be some form of base load generation, whether that is gas, nuclear, or other technologies over time. Who knows where those will be? But I do think, you know, we should expect a balance in the economy. I'm not sure that actually that much gas plant is actually really being built today. I mean, there are a couple of plans, but actually really bricks in the being built and plant being built is actually not really happening yet. So I think that's a little bit of, you know, I mean, the challenge for us as a country is how do we bridge these things all together at the same time and actually have a holistic plan.
Okay. Michael, yeah?
Yeah, just to come back on the gas point. The New Climate Economy, which I'm involved with, produced a very interesting paper on the role of gas as a bridge, which is what the gas industry want everybody to believe that it can be a bridge. It's a very short-term bridge, and it needs very strong guardrails. Gas produces greenhouse gas emissions. It produces methane, particularly from fracking. And very quickly, in the long-run investment that you're talking about, gas will have to decarbonize. And that means carbon capture and storage, which the energy companies, the fossil companies, despite talking about, do not put their money into. So this idea that gas is a bridge is, if not dangerous, we've got to be treated with a great deal of caution. And it is such a huge shame that this government is putting so much into fracking when all these other disruptive technologies are just waiting to be exploited. And for the country to be putting its energy, investment and effort there, instead of into all the things that Anthony Hobley was talking about and what's going into the storage field, which is revolutionizing not just the markets here, but in the whole of the world, particularly in places where you haven't got centralized grids, where a combination of renewables and storage offers huge opportunities to provide access to people who don't have electricity now. There are huge disruptive markets out there. Britain could be in the forefront of this. The coalition government actually had not a bad innovation policy, picked some technology clusters that were David Willett's when he was the business minister. And that is the future. The future for this country is in meeting this massive global demand that is being created by by the revolution and by the political commitments that are being made. And it really is, it would be a shame if we went down the route of the dinosaur technologies, not these massive new and fascinating and exciting technologies with all the jobs and export opportunities that arise from them. So this is an agenda in which people who feel morally concerned about this can ally with those who want to make some money out of it, and that way we get change.
Okay, thank you. On that note, I am going to bring it to a close. I know there are many more people wanting to ask questions. Do please come to the reception. There'll be people out there showing you which way to go. Thank you very much for your attention, your questions. Thank you to our panel, to Michael, Ben, to Andrew, and to Fiona. Thank you all very much. And remember Al Gore's words. His 3 questions: must we, can we, will we change? Yes to the first 2. We shall see with the third. Thank you all very much.